James Whitmore was a man who had everything money could buy, but his heart felt heavier than ever. He lived in a sprawling penthouse overlooking the city, where luxury cars lined the streets below, and towering skyscrapers stretched toward the sky. Yet despite all his wealth, there was an emptiness inside him that no amount of riches could fill. It wasn't always this way. Once James had been a happy man, a devoted father to his son Ethan, and a loving husband to his wife Sarah. But life had taken a cruel turn one fateful day when tragedy struck. Years ago, Ethan, then just 10 years old, had been involved in a car accident while returning from school. The crash left him paralyzed from the waist down, confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life, or so the doctors said. For James, it felt like the ground beneath him had crumbled. His marriage began to fall apart under the weight of grief, and eventually, Sarah left, unable to bear the constant pain and guilt that hung over their home. Now James spent most of his days working tirelessly at his company, burying himself in meetings and deals to avoid facing the reality of his broken family. On this particular evening, James stepped out of an upscale restaurant after finishing dinner alone. The air was cool and the streets buzzed with activity. People hurried past him, some dressed in fine suits, others in casual clothes, but none paid much attention to the tall, well-dressed man walking briskly among them. James preferred it that way. He didn't want anyone's pity or sympathy. What he wanted was something no doctor, scientist, or therapist could give him: a miracle. As he turned onto a quieter street, heading toward his parked car, he noticed someone sitting on the curb. It was a young girl, barely 12 years old, her dark skin contrasting sharply with the bright orange fabric draped loosely around her shoulders. Her clothes were torn and dirty, evidence of a hard life on the streets. She held a small tin cup in her hands, which rattled faintly as coins clinked together inside. Most people would have walked right past her without a second glance, perhaps tossing a coin if they felt generous. But something about her caught James's eye. The girl looked up as he approached, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that startled him. There was no fear or desperation in her gaze, only calm determination. Before James could decide whether to ignore her or drop some change into her cup, she spoke. "Sir," she said softly yet firmly, "I can make your son walk again." For a moment, James froze. The words hit him like a thunderclap, jolting him out of his usual indifference. He stared at her, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice low and wary. "I said I can make your son walk again," she repeated, meeting his gaze without flinching. Her tone carried a quiet authority that seemed far beyond her years. James felt a mix of emotions: anger, disbelief, and a flicker of hope he quickly tried to suppress. Who was this child to claim such a thing? Did she think she could play on his vulnerability for a few extra coins? He opened his mouth to dismiss her, ready to tell her not to waste her time with ridiculous promises. But before he could speak, she added, "Ethan has been in a wheelchair for 6 years now. The doctors told you there's no cure. But they don't know everything." James's blood ran cold. How could she possibly know Ethan's name or the details of his condition? He hadn't mentioned his son to anyone recently, let alone a stranger on the street. Was this some kind of trick? A scam? Or was it something else? Despite his skepticism, curiosity got the better of him. Instead of brushing her off, he knelt down slightly to get a closer look at her face. Up close, he saw that her eyes were filled with a strange light, almost as if she carried a secret too big for someone her age. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice sharper than he intended. "My name is Amina," she replied simply, "and I'm here to help." James shook, his head trying to clear the confusion clouding his mind. "Help? How can you help? Do you even know what you're talking about?" Amina nodded slowly, her expression unwavering. "Yes, sir, I know exactly what I'm talking about. Your son doesn't need machines or medicine. He needs faith, and I have it." Faith. The word resonated deeply within James, though he couldn't quite explain why. Faith was something he had lost long ago, along with his hope for a normal life. Could it really be the key to healing Ethan? Or was this just another cruel twist of fate, dangling false hope in front of him? As James stood there, torn between disbelief and longing, Amina reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny wooden cross attached to a frayed string. She held it out to him, her fingers trembling slightly. "Take this," she said. "Keep it close. You'll understand soon enough." James hesitated, unsure whether to accept the offering. Finally, against his better judgment, he took the cross. It was rough and unpolished, clearly handmade, but it felt oddly comforting in his palm. As he straightened up, preparing to leave, Amina called after him. "Don't wait too long, sir. Miracles don't happen by themselves." With those parting words, she turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving James standing alone on the sidewalk, clutching the wooden cross and wondering if he had just encountered something extraordinary, or if he was simply losing his grip on reality. James couldn't shake off the encounter with Amina. As he drove home that night, his mind replayed her words over and over again. "I can make your son walk again." It sounded impossible, absurd even, yet there was something about her tone, her unwavering certainty, that lingered in his thoughts like an unanswered question. He glanced at the wooden cross resting on the passenger seat beside him. Its rough surface seemed to mock him, a silent reminder of the strange promise she had made. How could a child living on the streets know anything about Ethan's condition? And why did she seem so confident in her claim? When James arrived at his penthouse, he found Ethan in the living room watching television. His son sat slouched in his wheelchair, his expression blank as usual. At 16, Ethan had grown used to his limitations, though James knew the boy, still dreamed of running, jumping, and playing sports like other kids his age. Those dreams were buried deep now, hidden beneath layers of frustration and resignation. James hated seeing his son this way, but what could he do? He had spent countless hours consulting specialists, exploring experimental treatments, and pouring money into research, all to no avail. The doctors had been clear. Ethan's paralysis was permanent. Still holding the wooden cross, James sank into a chair across from Ethan. "How was your day?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Ethan shrugged without looking away from the screen. "Fine," he muttered. James hesitated, unsure whether to mention Amina. What would Ethan think if he told him about the mysterious girl who claimed she could heal him? Would it give him false hope? Or would it be cruel to raise expectations only to have them dashed later? In the end, James decided to keep quiet, for now. Instead, he excused himself and retreated to his study, where he locked the door behind him. For hours, James sat at his desk, staring at the wooden cross. He turned it over in his hands, examining every detail. There was nothing remarkable about it, just a simple piece of carved wood tied to a string. Yet it felt heavier than it should, as if it carried some unseen significance. Finally, unable to sit still any longer, James picked up his phone and dialed his assistant, Mark. "Mark, I need you to look into something for me," James said when the call connected. "Of course, sir. What is it?" Mark replied promptly. "There's a girl, a young girl, maybe 12 or 13 years old. She lives on the streets near the restaurant district. Her name is Amina. Find out everything you can about her." Mark paused, clearly surprised by the request. "A street kid, sir? May I ask why?" James hesitated, then sighed. "Just do it, Mark. Trust me." Over the next few days, James waited anxiously for news. During the day, he threw himself into work, signing contracts and attending meetings to distract himself. But at night, he found himself pacing his apartment, thinking about Amina and her bold declaration. Who was she really? Was she just a beggar trying to exploit his desperation? Or was there something more to her story? Finally, Mark called him back with the information he'd gathered. "Sir, I've done some digging," Mark began. "This Amina, she's not unknown around the area. People talk about her. Some say she's a prophetess. Others think she's crazy. But there are stories, rumors really, about miracles happening wherever she goes." "Miracles?" James echoed, his skepticism rising. What kind of miracles? Well, sir, apparently several families claim their sick loved ones were healed after meeting her. One woman swore her blind grandmother regained her sight after Amina prayed with her. Another man said his son, who suffered from seizures, hasn't had an episode since Amina visited their home. Of course, none of these claims are verified, but the locals seem to believe them. James frowned. You're telling me people actually trust this girl? A homeless child? It's hard to explain, sir, Mark admitted. But yes, they do. From what I've heard, she has a reputation for helping those in need. Not just physically, but emotionally too. She listens to them, prays with them, and somehow makes them feel hopeful again. Whether it's divine intervention or coincidence, I don't know. But the stories are compelling. Compelling wasn't the word James would have chosen. Unbelievable, perhaps. Ridiculous, even. Still, he couldn't deny the growing curiosity gnawing at him. If there was even a sliver of truth to these rumors, didn't he owe it to Ethan to investigate further? After all, what did he have to lose? The next morning, James instructed Mark to arrange a meeting with Amina. Bring her here, he said firmly. To my penthouse. Mark raised an eyebrow, but nodded. Understood, sir. I'll take care of it. Later that evening, Amina arrived, escorted by Mark. She looked exactly as James remembered her, small, frail, and dressed in ragged clothes, but her presence commanded attention. She walked barefoot across the marble floor of the penthouse, seemingly unfazed by the opulence surrounding her. When she reached James, she stopped and looked up at him with those piercing eyes. You wanted to see me, sir? She asked quietly. James gestured toward the couch. Sit down. Amina obeyed, folding her legs beneath her as she settled onto the cushion. Ethan wheeled himself into the room, curious about the visitor. He studied her with a mixture of suspicion and intrigue. Who's this? He asked bluntly. This is Amina, James explained. She says she can help you. Ethan snorted. Help me how? By giving me another useless therapy session? Thanks, but no thanks. Amina didn't react to his sarcasm. Instead, she smiled gently. Ethan, I'm not here to waste your time. I'm here because I believe in miracles, and I believe in you. Her words caught Ethan off guard. For a moment, he stared at her, unsure how to respond. Then he glanced at his father, who avoided his gaze. Dad, what's going on? Ethan demanded. James cleared his throat. I met Amina a few days ago. She seems to think she can... Well, she thinks she can help you walk again. Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief. Walk again? Are you serious right now? I know it sounds crazy, James admitted, but I thought it was worth hearing her out. Ethan turned his attention back to Amina. So, what's your plan? Magic spells, fairy dust? Amina chuckled softly. No magic, Ethan, just faith. Faith that sometimes things we can't explain happen anyway. Things bigger than us. Ethan rolled his eyes. Yeah, okay, sure. Despite his skepticism, James noticed a flicker of interest in his son's expression. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was desperation. Either way, James decided to press forward. Go ahead, Amina. Do whatever it is you came here to do. Amina nodded and moved closer to Ethan. Kneeling beside his wheelchair, she placed her hands gently on his legs. Closing her eyes, she began to pray. Her voice was soft but steady, filled with a conviction that silenced the room. James watched in stunned silence, unsure whether to feel hopeful or foolish. Ethan, meanwhile, stared straight ahead, his face unreadable. Minutes stretched into hours as Amina continued praying. Occasionally, she would pause, take a deep breath, and resume. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. James paced back and forth, glancing at his watch and wondering when or if this bizarre ritual would end. Finally, Amina opened her eyes and stood up, visibly exhausted. It is done, she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The rest is up to you, Ethan. Ethan blinked, startled. Up to me? What does that mean? Amina smiled, faintly. You'll see, trust yourself and trust the process." With that, she turned to leave. James hurried after her. "Wait," he called, "and that's it? You're leaving?" "For now, yes," Amina replied. "But remember, sir, faith moves mountains. Don't lose sight of that." And with those parting words, she disappeared through the door, leaving James and Ethan alone once more. As the reality of what had just happened sank in, James felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him: hope, doubt, confusion, and a tiny spark of belief he hadn't felt in years. Whatever the outcome, one thing was certain: life as they knew it might never be the same again. In the days that followed Amina's visit, James found himself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, he couldn't stop thinking about her words, her promise that Ethan could walk again. On the other hand, doubt gnawed at him relentlessly. Was it possible? Could faith really heal something as severe as paralysis? Or was this just another dead end, another false hope dangled before them only to be snatched away? Ethan, for his part, seemed unfazed by the whole ordeal. He acted as though nothing had happened, dismissing Amina's prayer session as some strange performance meant to entertain rather than transform. But James noticed small changes in his son's behavior, subtle shifts that hinted at something deeper going on beneath the surface. For instance, Ethan began spending more time in his room, staring out the window with an intensity James hadn't seen in years. Occasionally, he'd catch Ethan glancing down at his legs, almost as if he were waiting for something to happen. One evening, about a week after Amina's visit, James walked into the living room and found Ethan sitting quietly in his wheelchair. The television was off and the room was unusually still. "How are you feeling?" James asked cautiously, breaking the silence. Ethan shrugged, not looking up. "Fine, I guess." James hesitated, unsure how to broach the subject. "You've been quiet lately. Is everything okay?" "Yeah, sure," Ethan replied, his tone indifferent. But then, after a pause, he added, "Dad, do you think she was telling the truth? That girl, Amina?" The question caught James off guard. He hadn't expected Ethan to bring her up, let alone express any interest in what she'd said. "I don't know, son," James admitted. "I want to believe her, but miracles aren't exactly easy to come by." Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on his lap. "It's weird, though. Ever since she came here, I've been feeling different, like something's changing inside me." James's heart skipped a beat. "Different how?" "I don't know," Ethan muttered. "It's hard to explain. Sometimes when I'm sitting here, I feel this tingling in my toes, like pins and needles but softer. And yesterday I thought I felt my ankle twitch. Just for a second, though, maybe I imagined it." James froze, his mind racing. Tingling? Twitching? Could these sensations be real, or was Ethan simply imagining things because he wanted so badly to believe? Either way, James knew they couldn't ignore this. If there was even a sliver of possibility that Amina's prayer had sparked something within Ethan, they needed to act on it. The next day, James took Ethan to see Dr. Patel, the neurologist, who had been overseeing his care since the accident. Dr. Patel was a kind, middle-aged woman with decades of experience treating spinal cord injuries. When James explained Ethan's symptoms, her expression turned thoughtful. "Well, Ethan," she began, turning to him, "these sensations you're describing, they're not unheard of in cases like yours. Sometimes, nerves can regenerate over time, especially in younger patients. However, it's rare for significant recovery to occur years after the injury without intervention." "So, you're saying this could be normal?" James asked, trying to mask his excitement. Dr. Patel nodded. "It's possible, but we'll need to run some tests to be sure. Let's take a closer look." Over the next few weeks, Ethan underwent a series of examinations, MRI scans, nerve conduction studies, and physical assessments. Each test brought new questions but also hints of progress. During one session, Ethan reported being able to wiggle his big toe slightly, a movement so faint that Dr. Patel almost missed it. In another, he managed to flex his ankle ever so slightly, though it required immense concentration. While the medical community remained cautious, labeling Ethan's improvements as spontaneous recovery, James couldn't help but connect the dots. These changes had started happening shortly after Amina's visit. Whether it was divine intervention, psychological suggestion, or sheer coincidence, James didn't care. All that mattered was that Ethan was showing signs of improvement, and for the first time in years, hope flickered brightly in their lives. As Ethan continued to work with therapists and doctors, James became increasingly obsessed with learning more about Amina. Who was she really? Where had she come from, and why had she chosen them? Determined to find answers, James decided to track her down himself. He returned to the area where he'd first met her, asking around and showing her picture to locals. Many recognized her immediately, referring to her as the Miracle Girl. They spoke of her kindness, her wisdom beyond her years, and the countless lives she had touched. Some claimed she had healed their ailments. Others credited her with restoring their faith during dark times. One elderly woman told James tearfully, "She saved my grandson's life. I don't know how she did it, but I'll never forget her face." Despite the glowing testimonials, no one seemed to know much about Amina's background. She lived on the streets, moving from place to place, often staying in makeshift shelters or abandoned buildings. Her origins were shrouded in mystery, adding to the aura of enigma surrounding her. Eventually, James located the shelter where Amina was rumored to reside. It was a humble structure made of corrugated metal and tarpaulin, nestled among similar dwellings on the outskirts of the city. As he approached, he saw children playing nearby, their laughter echoing through the narrow alleys. Inside the shelter, a group of women sat together, sewing clothes and chatting softly. When James entered, they looked up, surprised to see a well-dressed man in such surroundings. "I'm looking for Amina," James said, his voice firm yet respectful. One of the women nodded toward a corner of the room. There, sitting cross-legged on the floor, was Amina. She looked up as James approached, her expression calm and knowing, as if she'd been expecting him. "You came back," she said simply. "Yes," James replied, kneeling beside her. "I need to understand. How did you know about Ethan? About his condition?" Amina smiled faintly. "I didn't know anything, sir. Not in the way you're thinking, but when I saw you that night I felt something, a calling. I knew I had to speak to you." "A calling?" James echoed, frowning. "From whom?" "From God," Amina answered, without hesitation. "He guides me to those who need healing, not just of the body but of the spirit. Your son carries pain inside him, sir, pain that runs deeper than his legs. That's what I prayed for, the strength to overcome both." James stared at her, stunned. Her words resonated deeply, striking a chord he hadn't realized existed. Yes, Ethan's injury was physical, but it had also left emotional scars. On Ethan, on James, on their entire family. Perhaps Amina was right. Perhaps true healing required more than medicine or therapy. Perhaps it required faith, love, and belief in something greater. Before James could respond, Amina reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry, sir. Your son will walk again, not because of me, but because he believes he can. Faith moves mountains, remember?" With that, she stood up and disappeared into the crowd, leaving James alone once more. As he made his way back to his car, he clutched the wooden cross she had given him tightly in his hand. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to truly believe, to trust that miracles, however improbable, were still possible. Weeks turned into months, and Ethan's progress continued to defy medical explanation. At first, the changes were small, barely noticeable even to those closest to him. A twitch of his toe here, a slight flex of his ankle there. But as time went on, these tiny movements grew stronger, more deliberate. It was as if Ethan's body was slowly waking up from a long sleep, rediscovering muscles and nerves that had lain dormant for years. James watched this transformation with a mix of awe and disbelief. Every morning, he would knock on Ethan's doctor before heading to work, asking how his son felt. More often than not, Ethan would greet him with a grin, eager to share another milestone. One day, it was being able to lift his leg a few inches off the footrest of his wheelchair. Another day it was managing to stand upright for a brief moment while holding onto a walker. Each achievement, no matter how minor, filled James with a sense of wonder he hadn't experienced in years. But Ethan wasn't the only one changing. James himself began to notice a shift within him, a softening of the hardened shell he had built around his heart after Sarah left. For so long, he had buried himself in work, using success as a shield against pain. Now, however, he found himself wanting to be present, for Ethan, for himself, and even for Amina, whose mysterious presence lingered in his thoughts like an unanswered question. One evening, unable to shake the need for answers, James decided to visit Amina again. He returned to the makeshift shelter where he had last seen her, hoping she would still be there. To his relief, she was sitting exactly where he remembered her, in the corner of the room, surrounded by children who listened intently as she told them stories. When she saw James, her face lit up with recognition. "Sir," she said warmly, "you've come back." "Yes," James replied, kneeling beside her once more. "I needed to thank you. Whatever you did, it's working. Ethan is getting better, every day." Amina nodded, her expression serene. "It's not me, sir, it's faith. Faith in yourself, faith in your son, and faith in something bigger than both of you." Her words struck a chord deep within James. For years he had relied solely on science, logic, and wealth to solve problems. If doctors couldn't fix Ethan, then surely no one could. Yet here was Amina, reminding him that some things couldn't be measured or explained. They simply were. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Curiosity got the better of him, and James asked, "Tell me about yourself, Amina. Who are you? Where did you come from?" For the first time since they'd met, Amina hesitated. She looked down at her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap, before speaking softly. "I don't know much about my past, sir. I was very young when my parents died. After that, I lived on the streets, moving from place to place. Life was hard, but I never felt alone. Even when I had nothing, I always felt like someone or something was watching over me." She paused, glancing toward the children playing nearby. "Then when I was about 8, I started having dreams. Strange dreams where voices would speak to me, telling me to help people. At first I thought I was going crazy, but then one day I prayed for a woman whose baby was sick. The next morning the baby was fine. Word spread quickly and soon people began coming to me for help. That's all I do, sir. I pray. I listen. And sometimes miracles happen." James listened intently, his mind racing. Here was a child, no older than 12, who had endured unimaginable hardships yet radiated strength and wisdom far beyond her years. He couldn't help but feel humbled by her story, reminded of how fortunate he was despite his struggles. "But why us?" James asked finally. "Why did you choose Ethan? Why me?" Amina smiled gently. "Because you needed each other. You were lost, sir. Not just Ethan, but you too. You carried guilt and anger inside you, blaming yourself for what happened to your son. But guilt doesn't heal wounds. Love does. Faith does. I prayed for Ethan because I saw hope in him, and I prayed for you because I saw redemption." Her words hit James like a punch to the gut. Redemption. The idea of making amends, of finding purpose beyond his mistakes, had eluded him for years. Yet now, hearing it from Amina, it felt possible, maybe even inevitable. As they talked further, Amina revealed more about her life. Despite her hardships, she remained optimistic, believing that every person she helped brought her closer to fulfilling her mission. Her faith was unwavering, unshaken by doubt or fear. James marveled at her resilience, wondering how someone so young could possess such clarity and conviction. Before leaving, James handed Amina a thick envelope containing a generous sum of money. "This is for you," he said firmly. "Use it to build a proper home, send yourself to school, or whatever you need. You deserve it." To his surprise, Amina shook her head and pushed the envelope back toward him. "No, sir. I don't need it. What I do isn't about money. It's about love and faith. Keep it. Use it to help others instead. Her refusal stunned James. In his world, money solved everything. But Amina operated on a different plane, one where compassion and belief outweighed material wealth. Reluctantly, he took the envelope back, promising himself he would honor her wishes. When James returned home, he found Ethan practicing with his walker under the guidance of a physical therapist. Sweat dripped down Ethan's face as he concentrated, his knuckles white from gripping the handles tightly. But he didn't give up. Instead, he kept pushing forward, step by painstaking step. Seeing his son's determination, James felt a lump rise in his throat. This was the boy he remembered, the fighter who refused to back down no matter the odds. Only now Ethan wasn't fighting alone. He had hope, he had faith, and he had James standing beside him, cheering him on. That night, as Ethan rested, James sat alone in his study, staring at the wooden cross Amina had given him. He thought about her words, her courage, and the lessons she had taught him without even realizing it. Slowly, an idea began to form in his mind, an idea that would change not only his life but countless others as well. The next morning, James called Mark into his office. "Mark," he said, leaning forward, "I want you to set up a foundation, something big. We're going to fund schools, hospitals, and shelters for underserved communities. I want to focus on helping families like ours, families who have been broken by tragedy but still hold on to hope." Mark raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Are you sure, sir? That's a massive undertaking." "I've never been sure of anything," James replied. "Call it the Faith Foundation, in honor of Amina." And so James embarked on a new chapter of his life, one driven not by profit or prestige but by purpose. Inspired by Amina's humility and selflessness, he poured his resources into creating opportunities for those in need. Schools were built in areas where education was scarce. Hospitals opened their doors to patients who otherwise couldn't afford care. Shelters provided safe havens for families struggling to survive. Through it all, James kept Amina's wooden cross close to him, a constant reminder of the girl who had changed his life forever. Though she vanished as mysteriously as she had appeared, her impact lingered. She had shown James that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars and cents. It was measured in acts of kindness, in moments of connection, and in the belief that even the darkest nights could give way to dawn. As Ethan took his first independent steps months later, tears streaming down his face, James realized something profound. Amina hadn't just healed his son's body. She had healed their hearts, teaching them that faith, love, and redemption were the greatest miracles of all. Months had passed since Ethan took his first independent steps, and life for the Whitmore family had transformed in ways James could never have imagined. The penthouse that once felt cold and empty now buzzed with laughter and energy. Ethan's progress was nothing short of miraculous. He wasn't just walking, he was running, jumping, and even playing basketball again. His confidence soared, and the spark in his eyes returned brighter than ever. But it wasn't just Ethan who had changed. James himself felt like a new man, a man reborn. The Faith Foundation, named after Amina's unwavering belief, became a beacon of hope for countless families across the city. It started small, funding local schools and community centers, but quickly grew into something much larger. News of its success spread, inspiring donations from other wealthy individuals who wanted to make a difference. Within a year, the foundation expanded nationwide, providing scholarships, medical care, and safe housing to those in need. For James, this work filled the void that had haunted him for so long. He finally understood what it meant to live a life of purpose. But as fulfilling as these achievements were, James couldn't forget the girl who had sparked it all. Amina remained an enigma, her whereabouts unknown despite James's efforts to find her. He visited the makeshift shelter where they'd last spoken, only to discover it had been dismantled by city officials. The locals said she had moved on, continuing her journey to help others. Some claimed they saw her praying with a grieving mother outside a hospital. Others swore she appeared at a homeless encampment, offering comfort and food to those living there. Yet, No matter how hard James searched, Amina seemed always one step ahead, slipping through his fingers like smoke. One evening, as James sat in his study reflecting on everything that had happened, he noticed something peculiar about the wooden cross Amina had given him. Over time, its rough edges had smoothed slightly from being held so often, but tonight, he realized it wasn't just worn, it was warm, as if it carried a heartbeat of its own. Shaking off the thought as mere sentimentality, James placed it back on his desk and turned his attention to the stack of papers detailing the Foundation's latest projects. That night, however, he dreamed of Amina. She stood in a field bathed in golden sunlight, surrounded by children laughing and playing. Her voice echoed softly in his mind. "Your work is not done, sir. There are still mountains to move." When James woke, the dream lingered vividly in his thoughts. Though he didn't fully understand its meaning, he felt a renewed sense of urgency. That same day, he called Mark and instructed him to expand the Foundation's reach globally. "If we can change lives here," James said firmly, "why stop at our borders? Let's take this mission worldwide." As the months rolled on, Ethan continued to thrive. He joined the school track team, surprising everyone, including himself, with his speed and determination. At home, father and son grew closer, sharing stories and dreams they hadn't dared to voice before. One afternoon, while watching Ethan practice sprints in their backyard, James asked, "Do you ever think about her, about Amina?" Ethan paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "All the time," he admitted. "I mean, I don't know if she really did anything magical or whatever, but she made me believe I could do it. And that's kind of the same thing, right?" James nodded, smiling faintly. "Yeah, son, believing is half the battle." Ethan grinned, tossing him a playful punch. "Well, thanks for believing too, Dad. You stuck with me when I didn't even believe in myself." Those words struck James deeply. For years he had blamed himself for Ethan's accident, convinced he had failed as a father. But now, looking at the strong, resilient young man standing before him, James realized he hadn't failed at all. He had simply needed to learn a different way of loving, one rooted in faith, patience, and unwavering support. Meanwhile, the Faith Foundation flourished, touching lives far beyond what James had envisioned. In remote villages, schools rose from barren land, giving children access to education for the first time. In war-torn regions, mobile clinics provided life-saving medical care to refugees. Closer to home, shelters offered refuge to families struggling to rebuild their lives. Each project bore Amina's name, not literally but in spirit. Her message of hope and faith was woven into every initiative, reminding everyone involved that miracles were possible when people came together with a shared purpose. Despite his success, James often found himself wondering about Amina's origins. Who had she been before fate brought them together? What drove her to dedicate her life to helping strangers? These questions gnawed at him, fueling his desire to honor her legacy in every way he could. He began keeping a journal, documenting the Foundation's progress and the stories of those it helped. Someday he hoped to compile these accounts into a book, a testament to the power of faith and humanity. Then, one crisp autumn morning, as James strolled through a park near his office, he spotted someone familiar sitting on a bench. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. But as he drew closer, there was no mistaking her. Amina. She looked exactly the same. Small, frail, yet radiating an inner strength that commanded respect. Beside her sat a group of children, listening intently as she told them a story. "Amina," James called out, his voice trembling with emotion. She glanced up, her lips curving into a knowing smile. "Sir," she said warmly, "you've come a long way." I've been looking for you," James stammered, unsure where to begin. "How have you been? Where have you been?" Amina chuckled softly. "Here and there, sir, helping where I'm needed." James shook his head in disbelief. "Why didn't you stay? Why didn't you let me thank you properly?" Her expression softened. "Gratitude isn't necessary, sir. What matters is what you've done with it." Look at all the lives you've touched because of your faith. That's more than enough. Tears welled up in James's eyes. You saved my son, Amina. You saved me. How can I ever repay you? Amina stood up, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. By continuing to move mountains, sir. By never losing sight of the truth. That love and faith are the greatest gifts we can give. Before James could respond, she turned to leave, her figure blending seamlessly into the crowd. This time he didn't chase after her. Instead, he watched her go, clutching the wooden cross tightly in his hand. He knew she wouldn't return, but her presence would forever remain etched in his heart, and in the countless lives she had touched. Years later, when Ethan graduated at the top of his class and delivered a heartfelt speech about overcoming adversity, James sat in the audience, overcome with pride. As Ethan spoke, he mentioned Amina, thanking the mysterious girl who had inspired him to believe in himself. The crowd erupted in applause, unaware of the profound impact one child's faith had on an entire family, and eventually, the world. In the end, James realized that Amina's true miracle wasn't healing Ethan's legs or inspiring the Faith Foundation. It was teaching him, and everyone she met, that faith, love, and compassion could transform even the darkest moments into opportunities for redemption and renewal. And though she vanished as mysteriously as she had appeared, her legacy endured, carried forward by those who dared to believe in the impossible.